Okay. Let's see if this works this time. Dang it. The link. Perfect. Okay. Hello. We'll get started in a couple minutes. If you have questions, the second half of tonight's writing lab, after I go over the short answer questions, the DBQ, and the essay Q, is going to be just like a general Q&A because your test is in 2 days, a day and a half. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and I will answer them at the end of all of this. There we go. Lewis. I love you so much. Go away. No, no, no. Okay. Oh, wait, just a couple more minutes. It is 6 o'clock my time, so we'll get started in like 2 or 3 minutes. Make sure that you have for this one. There's not necessarily a ton of things that you need to write down. You just need to listen. And then what you could do for homework after this, if you wanted to, is practice writing some short answer questions or practice writing a thesis statement, practice doing some document analysis using the old prompts from the past couple of AP tests. And I'll tell you how to do that. But you don't necessarily need to write stuff down as I'm doing this. Just make sure you're paying attention because the writing portion overall is worth 60% of your test grade, which is a lot. Okay, 1 second. Okay, let's get right into it. Excuse me. 1 moment. Okay, perfect. Let's do this. So let's talk about how to write. Like I said, writing portion is worth 60% of your test. So the majority of your points will come from writing. And I wanted to break down what each of the writing sections is going to look like, how you're going to be graded, and then give you kind of possible answers of how you could answer any of these questions. So today's our writing lab day. I'm going to go over short answer questions first, document-based questions or DBQs, and then long essay questions or LEQs. To start off, these are the different verbs that you will be given on the writing portion of your test. So it's going to ask you to either compare, describe, evaluate, explain, identify, or support an argument. And in case you want to know what those means, I have this here for you, and I'll also upload this slide deck and the slide deck from all of my previous reviews onto Thinkific, so onto my ultimate review packet. So you can have access to this if you wanted to review it. But this should just be pretty straightforward. I hope that your teacher so far has asked you to describe and explain or evaluate and explain or support an argument with. So hopefully this is familiar. I have not seen an identify question on an AP history test in a very long time. Identify questions would be the one for short answer questions if it says identify, where you literally just provide an answer without any explanation. That doesn't really happen anymore. So I'm going to kind of ignore that. But you will see all of these other verbs used as I go throughout today's writing lab. So the first section of your test overall is 3 hours and 15 minutes. And the first section of your test is multiple choice and short answer. So you'll have 55 minutes to answer 55 multiple choice questions. And then when that time is over, you will immediately move on to the short answer part, which is 40 minutes, and you will respond to 3 total questions. I really like that the College Board does this because in theory, if you are recapping your brain and refreshing your brain on the content of the entire course when you're doing that multiple choice section. So that when you get to the short answer section, you're like, oh yeah, I remember all of these things because I literally just took a test on all of these things. So hopefully that's helpful for you and you find that okay. After your short answer questions, then you'll take a break. You'll come back, you'll do the DBQ and the LEQ. For your short answer questions, the first one you have to answer. It is a secondary source, which means that it is someone's interpretation of a primary source or someone who is not alive at the time who's writing it about an event that they were not present at. That is going to be from 1600 to 2001. Your second question is going to be a primary source from 1600 to 2001. The last couple of primary sources have been about the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, or industrialization. So those are really key things that the College Board loves to ask ask questions about. The College Board also really likes to ask questions about nationalism and imperialism. So I'm sure that one of these short answer questions will deal with one of those topics that I just mentioned. And then the third question, you are actually going to be given 2 prompts and you just respond to one. There's no stimulus, but they will focus on the same skill. So option 1 would be 1450 to 1815, and then option 2 will come from 1815 to 2001. So really, if you are studying, if you're like worried about specific time periods, 1600 to 1900 is going to be prime for you. So if we break it down, 40 minutes, 3 total questions that you need to respond to, it's like 13 minutes question, which is pretty fast. But if you have practice of how to write short answer questions a lot in your class, hopefully it just becomes routine. Each one has 3 parts to it. So you'll answer an A, B, and a C for each question. And I am going to ask you to respond to each of these in the same way, which is claim evidence reasoning. Now, if you are an advanced writer, you don't have to fall into this format. But for those who maybe struggle a little bit, or if you just like want to remove a thing that you need to think about when you are actually testing, if you just have this format in the back of your brain, you're like, oh yeah, I need to directly answer the question with a claim. I need to provide specific evidence that supports that answer. And then I need to say like the how, the why, the so what. That reasoning piece is where most people lose out on for the short answer questions and for their essays in general. Like it's just you tying the evidence that you just said back to your claim. I'm going to give you a ton of examples of how to do that in this writing lab, so don't worry. Basically, if you just use the word because as often as you possibly can, that will force you to explain why you just said what you said. This is due to, this is an effect because, this is a cause because, this is a change because, this is a continuity because. All of those are really helpful sentence stems. So my example for the short answer questions come from the 2018 exam. And this was the actual short answer question. So this is the first one, or sorry, this is the second one. This is the primary source. No, it's not. It's the first one. My bad. It is the secondary source from the 2018 exam. And it's this guy writing about the French Revolution in the early 1900s. So you'll see that it has a stimulus. Again, I always want to read the source first. 1A says, describe one prior intellectual change that influenced the events described in the passage. So in this passage, the author is talking about the fact that like the French bourgeoisie had reached social maturity. French thought desired to apply its methods of analysis and deduction to all of its reality, to society as well as nature. The French bourgeoisie had come conscious of its power, its wealth, its rights, and of its near infinite possibilities of development. In a word, the bourgeoisie had attained class consciousness. So describe one prior intellectual change that influenced the events described in the passage. I mean, this is literally asking you to describe a cause of the French Revolution, right? Like, what is a new change in intellectual thought that led to the French Revolution? And here's the example that I have for you. The Enlightenment and its focus on reason influenced the changes in the passage. So you can even see here that I'm using the wording from the question. You don't have to do that. I find it to be helpful so that you know that you are actually answering the right question versus kind of assuming that, I find that to be very helpful if you just use the wording from the prompt in your claim, in that claim, that first sentence of your short answer question. People like John Locke formulated the idea of the social contract, which encouraged people to overthrow a government that doesn't protect their natural rights. This would get you 1 out of 1 points for this part of the short answer question. I have my claim, it's bolded here. I have my evidence that is underlined here, and then I have my reasoning that is italicized here. The Enlightenment influenced the changes in the passage. Here's me with my evidence showing that I know what I'm talking about. I'm giving specific examples in my short answer question. That is so key with anything that you are writing. Don't just say people influence the Enlightenment. Like, actually show me what you know. Show me that you know what you're talking about. Don't just say philosophers, people like John Locke, right? Give me an actual specific example. Formulated the idea of the social contract. That was like, again, those two things go together. John Locke, this idea of a social contract, why does the government exist? It exists to protect the rights of the people. And then that leads me right into my reasoning. which encouraged people to overthrow a government that doesn't protect their natural rights. Let me see if I have any questions about that before I move on. Not yet. Perfect. If I'm looking at the second, the B, explain why the pattern of social changes that Jaurès described led to the French Revolution. So he's describing that, the bourgeoisie is becoming class conscious, or is achieving its class consciousness, and they're reaching social maturity. How would that lead to the French Revolution? Here's my example. Again, claim is bolded, evidence is underlined, reasoning is italicized. This social change caused by the Enlightenment led to the French Revolution because the bourgeoisie began to view themselves and people who were as people who were deserving of more political and economic rights. In order to gain those things, the bourgeoisie needed to reform their government or create a new one by overthrowing Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. So I did it. I'm showing you that you can do this claim evidence reasoning thing out of order as long as you have claim evidence and reasoning in each of your answers. So again, I'm directly using the wording from the prompt, and then I just kind of give my reasoning and my answer at the exact same time. Bourgeoisie began to view themselves as people who are more deserving of political and economic rights, and then I can kind of continue that reasoning. In order to gain these things, they had to overthrow the government. And my evidence here comes at the very end, right? Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. I'm not saying they needed to create a new one by overthrowing the monarchy. You are, again, being specific where you can be specific. So you just always kind of want to throw in those vocab terms. Vocab terms are excellent examples of evidence. And then the last one says, explain how an ideology of the 1800s influenced Jaurès' interpretation of the causes of the French Revolution. So what was going on in the 1800s that would make this author, this historian, who is reflecting back on history, interpret this in this way? My immediate brain, when I was writing the answers to this, went to liberalism. So again, those ideologies, those isms, you could have talked about, honestly, liberalism or nationalism would have been great examples here. That is the other thing about short answer questions and all of the writing of the AP history tests. It's not asking you to give one specific answer. There are so many different ways that you could answer each part of this question. And as long as it is historically accurate and you support it with explained evidence, then you'll get the point. So my example was Jaurès' interpretation was influenced by the rise in liberalism. Jaurès calls those who fought in the revolution the bourgeoisie, which was a term that became more prominent in the 1800s. Also, Jaurès highlights liberal ideology like wealth and rights as key motivations for the revolution. So I'm saying it was liberalism. Here are my two pieces of evidence that support that this is liberal ideology, bourgeoisie, wealth and rights. And then this ideology these ideologies were key motivations for the revolution. So if I'm looking at this first short answer question, each, in the A, the B, and the C are all worth a point each. So you either get the point or you don't get the point. There's no half points, which means that when it's asking you to describe or to explain, you really do need to make sure that you are explaining or describing. And that is why I honestly just say, if you can have claim evidence reasoning in each of these answers, then you'll be fine. That is our short answers. So let us move on. The D. Multiple choice, short answer questions, break. You will come back from your break and you're going to do the document-based question, your DBQ, and your long essay question, your LEQ. These times are up to you, which is a little bit challenging. I really encourage you to bring a watch, or hopefully, I'm sure they'll have a clock in the room or something. For your DBQ, you should give yourself 60 minutes. You should give yourself a solid 15 minutes to write or to prep and read through all the documents and think about how you're going to answer the question. And then give yourself 45 minutes to actually write out the DBQ. The DBQ is worth a lot on your test. So give yourself the appropriate time to write the DBQ. Your DBQ will always be from the time period 1600 to 2001. So I'm going to give you examples of prompts, and then I'll go over the rubric and then how to actually DBQ. So your 2019 DBQ was evaluate whether or not the Catholic Church in the 1600s was opposed to new ideas in science. Your 2021 DBQ was evaluate whether the new imperialism of the late 1800s and early 1900s was caused primarily by political motivations or by economic motivations. What a great essay. Your 2022 DBQ, evaluate whether or not the British imperial rule in India during the 1800s was primarily influenced by liberalism. And then the DBQ last year, one of them was about the Haitian Revolution, and one of them was about, I think it was about romanticism. That was the second one. Regardless, it essentially says, hey, here's a statement. Is it true? Like this one here. Or it'll say, hey, which one of these two things is more true? And you are just going to, using the evidence from the documents that are presented to you, answer the question. I love a DBQ because you don't have to know anything about the topic in order to actually do it well. What they're asking you to do is put on your historical thinking hat and, like a historian, critically examine evidence in order to draw a conclusion. Let's go over the rubric, and then let's go over how else you should DBQ. Your DBQ is worth 7 points. Part one is, well, the first thing that you need to do is write your contextualization statement. So you're going to situate whatever the prompt is about in the larger global context of what is happening in the world. Then you're going to immediately follow that up with a thesis statement. You need to directly answer the question with a claim. For example, British imperial rule in India during the 1800s was not motivated by liberalism because reason. Then your second section of the DBQ rubric comes from evidence. Oh my gosh, students, when you are writing an essay in history class, you cannot just list out vocab terms as evidence. That does not make you a good writer. That does not show that you know what you are talking about. Rather than just listing evidence, which is what this 1 point is. So even if you do that, you get a point, but don't do that because you're smarter than that. You need to actually relate the evidence to your overall claim. So if you are saying that British imperialism in India was not motivated by liberalism, you're not just going to say it wasn't motivated by liberalism because of document A, document C, and document D. You're going to say document A, summarize it in your own words, and then you're going to say, this shows that British imperialism was not motivated by liberalism because this shows, and the word because are going to be so helpful for you when you're writing a DBQ, because again, it forces you to explain that evidence. So if you're using content from 3 of the documents, you get a point. If you're using content from 6 of the documents, you get a point. Just a reminder, there are 7 total documents that are given to you in a DBQ, and you need to use all 7 because there is going to be a chance that you show misunderstanding of one of the documents. So you want to have that extra buffer document in there just in case. Not only that, but in order to, again, show the College Board what you know and show the fact that you are, in fact, a historian, you need to also bring up evidence that supports your claim that is not found in the documents. So what is another thing that you know of in your brain that is related to the topic that helps support your argument one way or the other? Evidence beyond the documents. Honestly, your thesis statement, your contextualization, and your evidence beyond the documents should be the 3 easiest points that you get in a DBQ. And the last 2 points come from analysis and reasoning. So this is where you get that fun document sourcing and kind of your complex, deep understanding. So for the first point, it says, for at least 3 documents, you explain how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to an argument. So maybe your teacher has used the acronym HIP. That's what I always use in my class. Historical context, intended audience, purpose, and perspective. So when you're going through a document, you should be considering, hey, yeah, why was this document written? To whom was this document originally written? What is the perspective of the author? And how would any of those things shape our understanding of what is being said and how it's being said? If you have struggled with this year, and if it doesn't make sense to you, ignore it. Genuinely just ignore this point and try to hit everything else. Demonstrates a complex understanding of the historical development that is the focus of the prompt, using evidence to corroborate, qualify, modify, or an argument that addresses the question. This is kind of that Yeah, there we go. This is that complex understanding. There are a lot of ways that you can get this point, this complexity point, and they just updated it for this year. So one of the ways that you can get this complexity point is using evidence from all of the documents, so literally from all 7 rather than just 6. Another way that you can get this point is, oh shoot, let me look it up real fast. I thought I had these memorized. There we go. You can explain nuance of an issue by analyzing multiple variables. You can explain both similarities and differences. Oh, this is the key way to do it. So if my whole paper is me arguing that British imperialism in India was not motivated by liberalism, if I want to show nuance to my argument, I would bring up that counterclaim. So I could say, while all of these things are true, while British imperialism is not motivated by liberalism, here are like 2 pieces of evidence. Here's like maybe one document, one piece of outside evidence that does in fact show it was motivated by imperialism. So that counterclaim is always going to get you closer to that complexity point on your AP test. So to summarize for a DBQ, your job is to take 15 minutes to read through all of the documents, some of which will be cartoons or pictures or images, and start to organize them. So you read the prompt immediately. Based on what the prompt is, you should be able to pretty naturally sort your documents into 2 different groups. One that is maybe saying, yes, these things, British imperialism was motivated by liberalism. No, British imperialism was not motivated by liberalism. It was in fact motivated by this other thing. And then as you go through the documents, make an actual like note next to the document, like a plus or a minus or something like that, so that you can really easily see these are the ones that support it. These are the ones that do not support it. Then you are going to use evidence from those documents to support your claim. Do not quote the documents. It is a waste of time. I know what the documents say when I'm reading through everything because I've spent so much time staring at them as an AP reader. You need to summarize parts of the document in your own words. And then at the end of that summary, in parentheses, say in doc A or say the author of the document. Either way is fine. So you are going to use evidence that's found in these documents to help you answer a question that you might not otherwise know the answer to. I love a DBQ. It's the best. I also really suggest that you spend time actually pre-writing in those 15 minutes of prep time. I would give yourself on like one of the DBQ papers, not on your actual written paper, but in the test booklet itself, I would like jot down specific things that you want to include, specific outside evidence, maybe a piece of contextualization you don't want to forget about. Because when you start writing, and as you're writing for 45 minutes, your brain might just forget about some of the things that you thought you wanted to remember when you started looking at those documents. Then you can look back at that pre-write and say, oh yeah, I wanted to include this, and you can include that in there. Also, with every history essay you write, don't do a conclusion. It's unnecessary. I don't need to read it. It's a waste of time. Instead of a conclusion, rewrite your thesis statement. You just spent 40 minutes, 45 minutes writing out your whole argument, and it probably makes a lot more sense in your head right now. So what you need to do, rather than writing a conclusion, is, again, readdress the prompt in totally new words. You've spent so much time thinking about it. Let's rewrite it again at the very end. There have been so many times when I, as a teacher and as an AP reader, have given a thesis point to a thesis statement that was written at the end of a paper because the one that they started with didn't actually answer the question or didn't establish the line of historical reasoning. So please, 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 please write your thesis statement at the very end of your essay. It will be so helpful. Cool. After that is our little LE. And let's see. Right after your DBQ, you're going to jump right into your LEQ. You'll have 40 minutes. You will be given 3 questions from 3 different time periods. They will all deal with the same skill. So they'll either all deal with comparison, so similarities and differences, continuity and change over time, or causation, so causes and effects. The same skill will be addressed each time. That's also why I think that it's a CCOT essay this time around, because we've not asked a CCOT essay in a while. And you get to choose whichever one you want to respond to. You have 40 minutes. Oh my gosh, prep for 5 minutes. You, again, need to have a game plan of where you're going so that when you're actually writing your essay, you know what is coming next rather than you just kind of like whiffing it and going off of whatever is in your brain. So take 5 minutes to prep. Seriously, it will be worth every single minute you take to do that. And then once you have that prep done, start writing. I'm going to go through the rubric first, and I'll give you LEQ examples from the past couple of years. So again, thesis statement and contextualization statement. Classic, same as always. You're going to start out your essay with a contextualization statement. I tell my students that I like to think of this as previously on before watching a new episode of TV, which I know that we stream things now, so this might be less relevant. But my example is Grey's Anatomy. I love Grey's Anatomy. I've watched Grey's Anatomy for over half of my life. And sometimes they bring up characters from like 10 seasons ago. And before they do that, for like 30 seconds before this new episode of TV, they'll like show me flashbacks of this person so that when I see that person in TV in this new episode, I'll be like, oh yeah, that person who did these things. I understand what's going on. That's your contextualization statement. What is happening in the world that is related to your prompt that you need to have in the background of your brain so that when you actually get down to your thesis statement, I know what you're talking about. You're not just pulling it out of thin air. You're like, oh, let me situate this. Here's like what's been happening in the 1800s. Then we can go talk about imperialism and why imperialism happened. Evidence is really easy for an LEQ. If you provide specific examples of evidence, aka 2 pieces of evidence for your LEQ, you'll get 2 points. But remember, we don't just list evidence in an AP class. We use that evidence to support our answer to the question, our thesis statement, or our claim. If you have perfected the CER, the short answer question response, a good body paragraph in a DBQ or in an LEQ is that, right? Your claim would be your topic sentence, evidence, reasoning, evidence, reasoning. That's a great body paragraph right there. You're not just listing evidence, you're telling me how or why that evidence proves your point. Sorry, LEQs, I forgot to say this, are worth 6 points total. So DBQs were 7 points, LEQs were 6 points. So here are the first 4. You should get those really easy. And honestly, you should get this 5th point really easy too. So you will use historical reasoning to frame or structure an argument that addresses the prompt. This is based on the skill that it asks. So if your essay is a continuity and change over time essay, if it's asking about how did this one thing change these things, you'll then just make sure that you are always telling me how the evidence that you have listed shows that a change occurred in that time period, or shows that this was in fact a continuity despite everything else that was happening. And then for the second point, this complexity point, they just changed this a little bit too. You can get this in a ton of ways. The easiest way to get it is, again, to do both similarities and differences, continuities and changes, causes and effects. So if the essay prompt is just asking you to look at causes of the Protestant Reformation, you should look at causes and also effects of the Protestant Reformation. And that is a really easy way to get toward that second analysis and reasoning point. So here's your LEQ from 2023. Again, you'll have 3 options, 3 different time periods. They all address the same skill, and it's up to you which one you want to answer. So evaluate the most significant political or social change during the Reformation period. Evaluate the most significant change in Europe's economic relationship with the rest of the world during the 1800s. Evaluate the most significant change in the sources of political instability in Europe in the 1900s. Oh, these are all such great questions. So if I'm looking at questions, let's look at 4 first. You could say this was a small change, but here's a significant change that could help you get toward that complexity point. For the third one, again, yeah, you could say this was a small, well, this change did happen. This more significant change happened. And if you address both of those, that can get you toward that complexity point. And then that first one, if you talk about political and social changes, that could get you that complexity point. From 2022, evaluate the most significant similarity between the French Revolution and the revolutions of 1848. Evaluate the most significant difference between economic development in Eastern Europe and economic development in Western Europe, and evaluate the most significant similarity between the regimes of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia in the interwar period. So again, I love these LEQs because you could choose whichever one you feel the most comfortable with answering. You need to provide 2 pieces of evidence in your LEQ. That's it, just 2. So even if you feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm talking about, you probably do. This is my reminder for you to just be as specific as possible. Don't say totalitarian leaders rose across Europe. Tell me the names of the totalitarian leaders that arose across Europe in the interwar period. And again, to get that complexity point, you can talk about a difference and similarities or a similarity and differences. And then, oh, that's it. I thought I had one more example, but that's it. Wow, that's perfect timing because I wanted 3 minutes for Q&A if you had any questions. And if you don't have any questions, your test is on Friday in like a day and a half. And I hope that you have the best time. And I wish you the best of luck. I will hang out here for like 5 minutes if you have questions. Other than that, study. You got this.